Welcome to our Wild Reads panel event. Our Wild Reads project aims to inspire a love and appreciation of nature through reading. And during today's event, our panel will be sharing their experiences of delivering community projects, along with their ideas on empowering communities and individuals to connect and enjoy nature and wildlife. How fantastic is that? So I'm Lisa, your host. Thank you for those of you joining us live, and hello to those of you catching up on our YouTube channel. And of course, thank you so much to our three panelists. Welcome, and please do introduce yourselves to our audience.
Hi there, my name's Lucy Shepherd and I'm the Wilder Communities Manager for Suffolk Wildlife Trust.
Hi, I'm Cordelia Spalding. I'm Nature England Senior Specialist for Public Engagement.
Hello, my name is Melissa Matthews and I am the Head of Audience Engagement for Suffolk Libraries, and I look after environmental responsibility on behalf of the organisation as well. Hello.
Well, it's fantastic that you could all be here for this event. Thank you again so much. I'd like to start with a question for you, Lucy. I know you have a next door nature project at Suffolk Wildlife Trust. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that works?
Yeah, sure. So actually my role as Wilder Communities Manager is really broad, and I sort of have a couple of elements of my job. So next door nature is one element, which yeah, I'll explain in just a sec. And I've also I run lots of events and sessions and workshops in Ipswich and the green spaces to try to connect people to wildlife. And I also work with our youth board as well. So I do quite a lot in my role. But I'll talk to everyone about my next door nature part of my job today. So yeah, this is a really exciting first of its kind project. All 46 trusts across the whole of our movement across the country are all doing a next door nature project. Suffolk Wildlife Trust project is in our county town, Ipswich, and we're working with communities in under-resourced areas in Ipswich who don't have access to green space, and we're helping them to work and develop their spaces, whether it's community hubs, businesses, or street corners to green it up and make it beneficial for both people and wildlife.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And brilliant work. I was already telling Lucy, me and my husband are members of Suffolk Wildlife Trust. It's a fantastic organisation. Cordelia, you've worked nationally. You've supported a wide range of public engagement events and strategies. Would you be able to share details of any project or event that you've been in and involved with?
It's a very long list, I have to say. But currently, I've been working with libraries now for over the last year, and hopefully going forward over the next 2 years. The project I'm currently involved with is called Culture Nature. It's working with 8 libraries across England, where our main aim is, as my fellow panelists are working as well, is to try and find ways to connect people to nature in ways that benefits them and their health and well-being, but also their community glue, how you get that sort of feeling of feeling welcome and a part of something, but obviously very much in aid of supporting wildlife. And I think libraries quite often have these little patches of green space that maybe there's a bench in, that maybe when there's parents and toddler hour gets used, but actually could be so much more. And they are real pollinator hotspots, particularly for our insects and our birds. So it's great being able to work with libraries to try and develop that further.
I absolutely love that. That's fantastic. And what you're talking about leads on incredibly well to what I'm about to ask Melissa about. So there's a Stowmarket Garden project, which is amazing. I've actually done an author event in that space since it was created, and it was a wonderful space to use. Melissa, would you be able to share the details of how did that project begin, and what space was created in that library?
It's almost like we've planned it, Cordelia, from your work to our work. The space was developed in collaboration with Stowmarket Library. So initially it was developed because one of the library information advisors there, Summer, essentially we were working with them on a creative project, and she just said, well, what about the garden? And especially with COVID and all the sort of the things that were happening kind of in the years following that, we were really aware that our outdoor spaces were a really important part of how we developed our offers to community, because that and also just generally just the benefits of being in nature and what that brought. So we worked in collaboration with Foxyard Studio and Medici Architects and 10 other artists to basically develop this outdoor space that inspired creativity, but that also worked alongside nature, created habitats, and also kind of created its own sort of mini program of its own for that library to sort of do bird watching, to sort of observe insects, to look at the opportunities for composting and things like that. So it really snowballed, and then from that we then developed a micro grants project across 10 libraries. So we had Bury Library created an insect highway, like Gainsborough Library looked at food waste and created like growing spaces. So it's just grown and grown and grown, and we now have a staff environmental responsibility focus group. So we come together and we look at ways to develop our work. And part of that is that we've switched to biodegradable library cards as well, which is absolutely fantastic. And now we're kind of just about to crack on with our environmentalist in residence program. So the plan is to have lots of lovely, wonderful workshops that are inspired by nature, that are inspired by the climate crisis, and really kind of welcoming communities into our spaces to look at the opportunities for really tackling that and using those library spaces and the wasteland around libraries as well as a way to encourage nature back into urban areas, but also just to really to find out more and to be advocates for just doing more and being better.
If those of you local, if you haven't been, Stowmarket Library Garden is gorgeous. And I really love, Melissa, when you're saying about like how it all began. Like, you know, we do work a lot with our frontline staff in our libraries about what works. And I find it quite interesting that even something as horrendous as the pandemic led to something so beautiful coming out of it, which is that garden space, and all these other libraries then going, okay, we've got some funds to do something wonderful now. So, you know, that's fantastic. Lucy, I'd like to follow on by asking, you know, for wildlife in urban spaces, how can we encourage that? What can we do as individuals to enable that?
Yeah, so I think sometimes for those living in urban spaces, which is me included, it can sometimes feel quite tough to think how can you do something positive for nature in sometimes quite tough environments. For example, my garden is 2/3 concrete. It's really tricky. Some of the community groups that I'm working with is purely concrete. Some of the schools that we visit is just, you know, a sea of grey. But yeah, I just firstly like to sort of encourage everyone to try something, and there's definitely lots of different things you can do, even if it seems quite tough. I think probably for me there are 3 key things that I'd encourage, and that's connectivity, conversations, and messiness. So the more connected we can get spaces, the better, even if you can't do much else in your space other than just create a hedgehog highway, so that animals can pass through, because of course not everyone is able to get out into a garden and to garden. But if all you could do is open up your fence or your little 13 by 13 centimetre gap, and that's all they need. In your fence, in your wall, underneath your sort of chainmail fence, anything like that, dig a hole underneath. Even that would just be such a help for wildlife. So yeah, connecting up the spaces and conversations. Encourage neighbours, friends to join you if you are able to do small actions. See if you can encourage someone else to do something as well. It's that snowball effect that we really need. And also messiness. I think what we say at the Wildlife Trust is just nature and wildlife loves messiness, and also just take that pressure off yourself. Gardens don't need to be pristine. Everyone these days is just, we're all so busy. So let's help ourselves out and at the same time help nature out as well. You know, for example, you don't need to rake up all the leaves this coming autumn. Hedgehogs desperately need them for their hibernaculums coming into autumn and winter. The nutrients need to seep back down into the soil and feed all of the other plants and trees throughout the winter months. You know, leave that patch of nettles, just a small patch even, or a corner of your grass, even if you can't leave the whole lot, you know, unmown. That might not be suitable for everyone. But even if you were to just, you know, what about a metre square of your garden? Just leave that messy, and it can be stylised as well. It doesn't have to look a complete tip, as it were. Yeah, you can be quite inventive with it. So I think the top three things for me would be connectivity, conversations, and messiness.
Love that. We're quite lucky to have a lovely garden, my husband and I. In the back of it, we are making it a bit wild. He says it's not an excuse not to do gardening, and it's wonderful. And we want, like, we live in a small village, and we have already been talking about the fact of trying to convince one of those next door neighbours' place who wants to do a hedgehog highway, because we do have hedgehogs that come in our garden, but we've got a little hedgehog home and things like that. So, you know, it's really amazing. So you say it's like trying to get more of the community involved with that, isn't it? Because a lot of these things you can't do on your own. Absolutely. So Cordelia, how do you think nature, because obviously we're talking about wildlife and nature and all these amazing things that organisations do, but how does it affect people's well-being? Why is that important?
Well, Lucy has just boosted my well-being, because now I know I've done exactly the right thing by letting my nettles take over a small corner of my garden. So thank you, Lucy. I think the reality is, as Lucy was saying, you know, the majority of us have very busy or at times quite stressful lives, particularly at the moment. I don't think there's anyone in the whole world who isn't feeling the pressure of either worrying about climate change or the price of fuel or heating our homes or food. You know, there is stress on every corner at the moment. And I think the thing about nature that it offers that nothing else does is a free sort of counselling session, really. You know, you're allowed to sit out in nature in whatever way you possibly can, whether that's in a park, if that's walking the kids to school and, you know, going down a particularly maybe slightly more leafy road, but actually to take a minute and absorb what it has to offer. And that can be from the tiniest thing, you know, the wonder of seeing the veins in a leaf that looks amazing, or a butterfly, or hearing a bird song, or even the wind going through the trees. There's something that experience offers that nothing else does. And it grounds us. And in doing so, it allows some of those worries just to take a step back, even for a minute. But I think, you know, we're in need of that sort of natural therapy. We're in need of a moment where the world we actually exist in, we can push to the side and just take a moment for us. And I think for many, that's a really rare thing. And you don't actually realize how much it means to you until you do it. And it does only have to be 5 minutes, but the 5 minutes afterwards will definitely be better as a result. So I would urge everybody to take that opportunity and grab a bit of nature for yourselves, because in doing so, you are doing something fantastic for nature as well. And that's because your value system, what you believe nature is worth, will increase in that moment. So yeah, it does huge amounts for people. Particularly, I've done quite a lot of work with those who have unfortunately gone through a period of their time where the demands of life have proved too much, or that something has had to give. And unfortunately, as individuals who are all dealing with lots of plates that we're trying to balance, human beings, we aren't infallible. We will have times when, you know what, today is not happening the way I'd like it to. And in all of those cases, I found that people have come out, even if it's by 1 degree, slightly better off than when they went into those situations. So yeah, go and grab a walk in the park and a sit on a bench with maybe your eyes closed for a second and see what it does for you.
I love what you were saying, and I also 100% agree that we don't realise until we do it. Sometimes people can put off those moments of well-being, as if somehow it's a luxury, as it's something that they shouldn't make time for. And because we always have so much going on, that I think sometimes there's a level of guilt of like wasting that time. But that's why I really love what you said, like, you know, the benefits, even 5-10 minutes can make such we weren't made to live in boxes, really, were we? To live in a box and drive in a box. We were made to be out in the world, in nature. Absolutely. And Melissa, you've already told us about lots of fantastic things that are already happening at Suffolk libraries. But do you think that libraries are a good place to explore environmental issues, and why that might be?
Definitely. I think libraries, in essence, just the whole sort of process of borrowing and loaning books is a form of like reducing resources, recycling. So we are perfectly placed to really lead that conversation. Also, before I crack on, I just want to say, like Cordelia, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to do some like forest bathing. You've zened me out. But yeah, so, and I think that's part of it as well. So particularly at Suffolk Libraries, we are one of the only known library services in the UK with an inbuilt mental health and wellbeing programme. And part of that is actually the inherent benefit of being in nature. I think that, and this, the Wild Reads programme that we've been running over the past few months really kind of celebrates actually like nature writing and just the value of just being present, being in those spaces. And I think what's really lovely about those library buildings is that a lot of them are surrounded by nature. A lot of them are really they're the last bastions of that shared community space. So actually, if you don't have a garden, if you don't have outdoor space, if you don't have access to wildlife, actually often, like obviously I'm not saying they're all unkempt, but there's often wildlife in those spaces, and it's a really inviting space. But also fundamentally, I think we're really aware of our responsibility as an organisation. We're a massive estate. So in Suffolk, we've got 45 libraries across the county. And we're really aware that by doing relatively little, we're going to have a huge impact. So if you times that by however many library services there are across the UK, all these buildings, all these spaces, all these sort of areas, and actually like we've got, there's areas where we don't have control, there's areas where we don't have, so like building and the buildings and things like that. But in terms of how, so we've really made a decision to focus on conservation and biodiversity, because that's where we have some control and we can enact change. And I think that's true for a lot of library services across the UK. So I think we're really perfectly placed to lead that conversation really authentically, because actually, like, cut to our core, we're about reusing resources, we're about really kind of sharing things out. And also we work really hyper locally, so then all those peripheral benefits of actually not getting in your car to drive and go to the high street and buy a book or things like that, that's intrinsic. We're about really kind of nurturing that culture of community and sharing, and all that loveliness that comes with it, and all the environmental benefits that come with that as well. So I could wax lyrical for hours and hours and hours on this, but you've got an event to run, Lisa.
It's fantastic. But I feel like as well, the other benefit is, it's like Cordelia was saying about the open spaces. Libraries are free. People can go, you know, when we're people are under, as you saying, so many of us are under a lot of pressure at the moment for various different reasons. This is a safe space. Libraries are a safe space. And it's like when Lucy was saying about like bringing people together, libraries have got all these community groups. You know, we've got other types of groups and reading groups and writing groups, and hopefully people that are meeting to work out where to put the Hedgehog Highway groups coming to libraries soon, because it's just such a great place for people to all come together. I wanted to now ask about, you know, because of your roles, because of how passionate we all are about nature and wildlife, I just wanted to ask each of you, what do you really love about nature and wildlife, and why is it important to you? Lucy?
Yeah, so I always find this question quite difficult because it's quite a big question, and there's so many reasons why I love wildlife and why it's important. But I think to just pinpoint a couple, I think one of the main reasons is I'm just constantly surprised by wildlife and nature. You know, whether it's you know, finding a new species in a space that we've worked hard to transform with a community group that perhaps you never in your wildest dreams thought would appear there, or you know, learning something new about wildlife, because there's so much to learn about wildlife. It's just, yeah, it seems endless at times, and I love how much you can learn from nature around you. But and yeah, and it's just the beauty in wildlife as well. It's just, I don't think for me there's much else in life where you get that standstill sort of moment where you're just taken away by something. And for me, that's nature, whether it's a species or a landscape or a feeling. And yeah, for me, I mean, wildlife is my whole life. I've sort of dedicated my career to wildlife. I studied at university, and then took that forward for a career. And all of my hobbies pretty much involve wildlife. But what I would say to people is that I think don't be afraid if actually wildlife isn't your everything, because I do think sometimes that puts people off. You get so many passionate and enthusiastic people about wildlife. I think every so often it might put others off. If you're brand new to wildlife, that's really okay. And just give it a go. Just try something small to do with wildlife, whether, you know, it is like Cordelia says, sitting on a bench outside. That's being in nature, and that counts. And you don't have to have your life all consumed by wildlife at all. Yeah, so yeah, I think if that sums it up, I think I could go on forever about why I love wildlife, but I think for me that's probably my reason.
And I love what you said as well there, Lucy, that it's really, it sort of take the pressure off people. It doesn't have to be their beginning and end. It doesn't need to be, as you say, like their main passion, but there's a peacefulness and a beauty there that they might really enjoy if they haven't already given it a go, given it a chance. So that's fantastic. Cordelia.
Yes, Lucy said, what a huge question this time in the afternoon. So there's a variety of things that come to mind. So if you were to cut me in half, you would find the word artist or creative. That's my background. Outside of Nature England, you can probably see in my little studio here, I'm constantly fiddling with something arty. What always fascinates me about nature in general is what a fantastic designer, engineer nature is. So for those of us in Suffolk and Norfolk, one of the things that we'll see pretty much anywhere you go is a reed with its sort of tail flapping in the wind, its sort of, you know, fluffy top. And for years I was like, God, that's really amazing. All those reeds are all pointing in the right direction or in the same direction. And it was only when I was out with one of our rangers, they went, well, you know why that is, don't you? And I was like, no. And it's because reeds have been designed as a tube inside a tube inside a tube, so that the top of the reed will swing round like a flag in the wind. And it's been designed to do that so it doesn't get knocked over, so that it doesn't put up resistance to like a really forceful wind. And I was like, wow, that's the most amazing piece of engineering. And that is where fascination and a constant interest comes from for me. And I'm lucky enough to have just become a grandma. My grandson is now 6 months old. And so we've done our first sort of like toddling around in the garden. And even he, without any, you know, any knowledge being fed into him yet, you know, he'll grab at a leaf. He'll want to like go for a nice flower. And so I think it's intrinsically in us, that interest. I just think it's unfortunate that life breeds it out of us as we get older. So I would urge anyone online who's maybe a slightly more vintage to go and revisit, to touch, to feel, to listen, to look, but also for those who are nurturing new life, new young people, then yeah, let them have a go at finding and discovering, because I think that it's that absolute fascination with how nature works that for me constantly brings me back time again.
That's amazing. And it reminded me a lot of our launch event with Sarah Gibson about her book Swifts and Us, which, I mean, gosh, it blew my mind. I had no idea around swifts. It was an area that I hadn't really looked into. And like wildlife, animals can be utterly fascinating at the things that they do and how they live. You know, like swifts are in the air, like pretty much all the time. I'm like, gosh, they must be knackered.
I'd just like to add the other thing that I think is really I think we forget about is nature is not just, you know, plants and animals. It's also geology. It's also the shell on a beach. It's the tide, the wave, the water, the sky, the rain. And so actually it's very rare, apart from when we're in our own boxes, that we're completely away from it. But the minute you've put a plant in your front room, guess what? It's back in the room. So you're never going to escape it. And let's hope we don't have to.
I love that. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, what set add those for really like inspirational answers. I think for me, I mean, I was a bit of a wild child, so I think growing up, I just sort of chucked out into the garden for hours on end, just to sort of potter around. And I think a lot of it goes back to what Cordelia was saying, and also what Lucy was saying. I think, like, fundamentally, I think nature allows this sort of presence. I think so much you do get bogged down in the day-to-day admin of life, and actually what's really great about nature is it's very, you have to be present and you have to be kind of like in the moment, and it's so brilliant for your well-being, and those lovely things about actually just not putting too much pressure on yourself, just sitting on a bench and just observing it has huge benefits. And I think that's and it reconnects us with like our bodies and the surrounding area. And I think those sort of other areas around, just sort of actually like doing things that you enjoy, like creating, like listening to music, or just sort of just being observant in those spaces, I think is really beneficial. And it doesn't have to be this kind of hardcore eco warrior kind of manifesto situation. You can have these really quiet moments of celebration and of being in your garden, or being in a park, or just sitting outside your office, or whatever floats your boat.
Whatever you can get to. I feel like it's like it brings us back to ourselves again.
Oh yeah,
it's like the world is full of so much noise sometimes, and it sort of brings us back to our more core being. I always feel of that more sort of calm nature beneath all the crazy. Well, actually, are you happy, Melissa, to I'll pop on to the next question?
Let's go for it.
We'll go the other way. Of what can we do to encourage communities and individuals to, and I've said, like, to care about wildlife and nature, and we've already started to touch upon this. The last question of, like, how do we, what can we do as organisations to bring other people into this, even if it's in a light touch way?
I think it's a really good question. I think there's a huge amount of work around kind of de-fetishizing sort of like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like just kind of make it really kind of celebrating all these really small moments in accessible ways of engaging with wildlife and engaging with nature and engaging with like climate action. Because I think sometimes it can be really overwhelming being presented with this big picture and this big crisis, and it's all happening at the moment when we're like, it's all, and I think that can be quite inaccessible for somebody that's just like, I just want to go to Tesco's and and live my life. And actually, so I think that finding those entry points into engaging with nature and those pathways in, and looking at those small moments and accessible ways of kind of drawing that out, I think is really useful. I think also in terms of the work that we've been doing for our libraries, I think it's kind of realizing that actually outdoors is a space. If you're doing a workshop, if you're doing like what we found with the Stone Market Garden project, we were thinking about actually how that outdoor space nurtured existing groups that we were doing inside, so like Baby Bounce and Top Rock and Top Time, and actually just doing what you would normally do but doing it outside, I think is a really lovely kind of way to engage with nature. But I think in terms of that advocacy, I think obviously as an organisation, I think there's a responsibility on us to provide programmes that are inspired by nature and that take and that really celebrate that as part of as just content, I think is really important. But being really aware of actually that people will be coming to that, well, there'll be different points in their journey in terms of understanding, and some people will be like, I know I've got like nephews and nieces that are afraid of flies and slugs and things like that, and actually they're at a different point. So it's kind of just normalizing sort of like just picking up a slug, and so whereas you might have somebody that's like totally into twitching and bird watching, and that actually we're going to go off like to a whole hide. I think it's really kind of meeting people at where they are, rather than kind of this sort of implied judgment that you should already know this and you should know what this leaf is. And I think what libraries are really good for that, because I think we're so used to just meeting so many different people that actually we're quite adaptable and going, well, actually, if you're like, let's start with the picking up the slug thing and then go from there. But yeah.
And I think what you said at the beginning as well, when you were talking, it was almost like you don't want to overwhelm people. We almost want to make it kind of, they're in nature by accident in a way. We're just doing the event outside now, isn't that wonderful? And normalising it. Cordelia.
It made me laugh as Mel was talking there, because I'm the most useless cook that's ever walked the planet, but it doesn't mean I don't enjoy great food. And I think that that's the sort of view that I would offer to people about nature. You don't need to know anything. It shouldn't stop you enjoying it and valuing it. And I think as well, people need to consider that their own space is their own place for nature. So it doesn't really matter if you've only got a window box or a pot with a tomato in it. You are contributing. So I think there's something about one, having confidence and not worrying about what you don't know. And I think the second thing is taking pride in the things that you do to benefit nature and yourself. And I think that those, hopefully, just be generous and kind to yourself, and hopefully in turn you will be generous and kind to nature. You know, if you go to a park and you drop litter there today, do you know what? It's going to be there when you go there tomorrow. So you're not going to get the same enjoyment yourself out of it tomorrow, and neither will nature. So I think there are very many things that if we look after ourselves well, and the spaces that we share with others, then nature will naturally benefit from it. But I think there is a lot to be said for just being kind to yourself. Hopefully means that that's extended to nature, because it's your own space, it's your world as much as anybody else's. So that should do the trick, I hope.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I like how you talked about the sort of small things people do. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to make them invalid. Like, it's not enough. I've only got one, as you say, one tomato plant. It's you know, it doesn't count. It counts. It all counts. And I think that comes part with what you're saying about being kinder to yourself and not invalidating the things that you do, because it's not massive. You know, you're not campaigning across the country and the world on environmental issues, so it's not enough. So I think that's really, really important to make clear. Lucy.
So I was just going to add, it is a mosaic. If we've all got a little bit to play, then hopefully it makes it bigger in the end.
Absolutely, it all comes. It's again similar, I think, to like communities. It's like having a jigsaw. It's bringing all those bits together, and they all make a difference and create a better world. Lucy.
So yeah, I do think that the key for becoming connected is to care is to become connected to wildlife, which obviously is this theme of this talk today, really. But I think what we as a charity try to do, and we work towards, is, you know, we have lots of different groups that come to us, and they're already connected. They are complete keen beans. They are invested in wildlife. They've done it since, you know, a tot, and it's great, you know, job done. And then we work with lots of people who they're very much starting out in the very beginning of their journey, and they don't have a clue about wildlife. And I love that we get to work with such a mix of different groups, and it's finding out what is it that can help connect you to wildlife. Because of all of the sessions that I've done over the years, I've never not been able to find a way to connect people to wildlife, or to help someone realise their connection. And sometimes it just takes a bit of extra thinking. And, you know, one of my bugbears is when people say, oh, you know, kids should just get off their phones. Well, actually, should they? Why don't we find ways for them to use their phones within nature, and use it in a positive way for nature? So, you know, we run photography courses, and they don't have to have a big fancy camera at all. They could just come along with a smartphone that they have. If all teens, pretty much this day and age, the stats are pretty high that they have one. Well, let's show them how they could use that in nature. And then perhaps when they're on their way to school or into town, they might just stop to look at that leaf against an urban landscape. And they might just take a break in their stride to take a look and observe nature that perhaps they wouldn't have before. Or, you know, if someone's really into their literature and their reading, and they haven't really ever thought about wildlife before, well, why not start off with a wild read, and then maybe take that wild read outside? Yeah, and it's just finding those little sort of pathways, I think, and think, well, what does sort of make me tick? What does, you know, sort of inspire me, and how can that then mix in and blend into wildlife? And then I think that can be a really good start to get people interested and connected to nature. And I think quite often that's an easier way in. It doesn't have to start nature first. Perhaps you could start with your existing hobby and interest, and then, yeah, go in.
Absolutely. I think Melissa said earlier as well, it's about taking people where they are. And that's very much what you're talking about, because we're all different, you know. Like I like wildlife, but I'm crazy about animals and wildlife, you know, and people are different, and it's working out, you know, especially people you're talking about spending time with and encouraging this, what works for them, because we're all different. We all have our different passions, and then they can start a new exciting journey with using where they're already at. I love the photography course. That's brilliant. I was inspired to take, you know, when they've already got the phones. I'm gonna finish off by, just because we talked about lots of really amazing things people can do, but for those watching live and catching up on the YouTube channel, if you were to suggest a sort of call to action, well, maybe if it's only one or two things that you would say that they could do, what would you suggest or recommend? And I'll start with you, Lucy.
Yeah, so I'd really just like to say, any small action that anyone can do. If everyone in the UK did something small for wildlife, we would be in such a different position. It really doesn't have to be anything huge. So I think probably if I had to choose one thing, if someone could leave something messy in their garden, if they're lucky enough to have a garden, just leave a messy area. Or can you put a bird feeder up? If you don't have a garden, can you put up a window bird feeder? And, you know, and even just writing to your MP, get opinions changed, talk to people. There are some things that if you're not fortunate enough to be able to get outside very often, well, you know, you could sit and write letters and campaign from where you are. So don't get overwhelmed by thinking large scale. Just small, tiny actions. And if you can then encourage at least even in one other person to do the same, well, that's the ripple effect that that we desperately need to happen across the UK, and that would honestly go such a long way to help wildlife out.
Absolutely. Cordelia.
So what can we do to help wildlife out? So I'm one of those people who's got like none of the cement in between the paving in their garden, and I've got a husband with a big bag of cement, very desperate to fill it in and get rid of all the weeds. And I've sort of told him to leave that alone. You know, they are amazing highways for insects and things that we may not wish to see on the surface. So let's keep them in those little cracks. It makes them happy, it makes me happy. And the other thing I do is I think it's as we've all talked about, find your way in. I often describe to people it's a bit like going to a football match or the cinema. There might be lots of different ways in. There are lots of different ways in, but the focus is definitely in that main arena, and that is nature, because we're all going to benefit from it. So it doesn't matter which door you go in, whether it's because of literature or photography or art, or like me being fascinated by how something's made. Just find your way into that arena, and hopefully then you'll begin to reap the benefits that it can offer.
Melissa, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think I always go back to this idea of like where have I got control, where have I got power? So I would, in terms of that call to action, I think I'd say there's this lovely thing that you can do, which is kind of like looking at what is in my control, what do I have influence over, what is totally out of my control. And I think that's a really kind of empowering way to kind of think of actually what is in my control. Is it not putting concrete in the cracks in my pavement? That's something that I can do. Or it might be going, actually, I like, for example, I'm really lucky. I look after Suffolk Library's creative program. So then it was like going, actually, I've got some potential to then actually like work with our senior leadership team and think about ways of working and address issues around just sort of processes and stuff like that. So it's really understanding where is your power, where is your control, and actually not kind of sort of minimizing it and going, well, it's only that and that's not going to make any difference. I think we're very humble as a nation and going, oh well, it's just little old me and I'm all on my own and nothing I can do can change anything. But actually those small actions of like of brilliance, of sort of leaving part of your garden messy, of inviting, like putting up a bird feeder, leaving the gaps in the pavement, it's all small steps, and actually it's one bite of the elephant at a time, I think, which is really important. Actually, this is a big issue, it's a big global issue, and actually there's billions and billions of people around the world, and actually if we each do just something, a small like act of rebellion, and see what's in our control and what is in our power to change, I think that's a really, that the impact will be huge. So that, yeah, that's my call to action. Just go, also just use your library, guys. I think that's the takeaway. We're doing all these lovely brilliant things with all with Cordelia and with Suffolk Wildlife Trust as well. Like, I think just join in, and we'll have our environmentalists and residents come to a workshop. I'm going to do a shameless plug.
Why not? I wholeheartedly approve. So as everyone in the panel has just been saying, it can be small things. Don't think that that's not invalid. Between us, between everybody, they all add up. They all make a difference, and you absolutely can make a difference. Go get a bird feeder, pop it up in your garden, and know that you're contributing to this. And no matter how small you think it is, it does absolutely make a difference, and it's in your power to do it. As Melissa said, you need to look at what is within your control. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us live, and those of you catching up on our YouTube channel. And a huge thanks to our 3 panelists for joining us today and sharing their experiences. Wild Reads will be returning again next year, and when we have more details of the look and feel of that, we will share them on our website. Thank you.